Hi guys, my name's Si from Lakeland Ascents and Highland Ascents. We run courses for climbers, for walkers and for mountaineers in the mountains of the UK. This here's Jen. What I want to do today is just to take you through the kit that we would recommend you have with you for a day of winter walking in the sort of higher mountains of the UK. So for example, a day of winter walking in the Scottish Highlands. Let's get straight on it. So first things first, let's take a look at this rucksack. So this is a roughly 35 to sort of 30-ish litre pack, and if you have a look at it, there's no kind of bells and whistles to it. It's quite straightforward and simple, and I haven't got anything attached to the outside sort of floating around in the wind, potentially getting lost. The only thing on the outside here is my ice axe. Okay, so 30-35 litres I think is a great size for sort of winter walking. It's not so big that you're tempted to take loads of kit with you that you don't potentially need, but at the same time, when you do need to just shove stuff in it and get off the hill in poor weather, you know, it's still quite easy to do that. So, you know, roughly sort of 30 to 35 litres is a good size to be looking for. My ice axe is stored down the compression straps here. That's my preferred way of carrying my ice axe. There are a couple of other ways you can carry your ice axe, and we'll go through that in another video, but for now, down the compression straps works for me. So let's just get that out of the way. So when I packed this rucksack, I did it quite strategically, and what I mean by that, I had to think about what kit I'm most likely to need first when I'm out in the mountains, and that just means that when I come to get that kit out early on in the day, I'm not having to unload the whole pack all over the snow, potentially having stuff blowing away or potentially losing kit in deep snow. So let's have a look how I've done it. So in the top of my pack, and the last thing that always goes in, is my helmet. Now I might not need this first of all, early on, but if I have this right down in my pack, buried deep, and then start shoving things on top of it, there's a reasonable chance that I could actually damage the helmet. But just by having it on the top means that, you know, that sort of minimises that risk. So that sits on the top, and there's a load of dead space in the helmet, so what I make sure that I do is I use that space effectively. And what I quite like to do is get my lunch and shove it in there, and then pack my helmet on the top of my rucksack. And that just means that A, my sandwiches are super accessible, which is pretty important, but B, they don't get wrecked. So that's quite a good little tip. The other thing that I like to have at the top is a dry bag with a pair of goggles in it, and they as well, for me, live inside my helmet like this. They're nicely protected and they're super accessible. They're an absolutely essential item when you're walking in the mountains of the UK and further afield, to be honest, because once we get the wind picking up snow and blowing it around, it gets in our eyes and it becomes like super difficult to operate and really difficult to navigate when you're doing this with your hand all the time to protect your eyes. So having a pair of goggles super accessible that fits well and that don't fog up is essential, and definitely essential for any of the courses you might come on with us. When you choose some goggles, it's a good idea to get some with either a clear lens or a yellow lens or maybe a pink lens, and that just means that they can be used in low light. If you have a sort of standard pair of ski goggles that have got a mirrored dark shaded lens and then try to use them in poor lighting conditions or in the dark, then obviously it's going to make it even darker and harder to use. So for me, I quite like a yellow lens. These are just an old pair of ski goggles with a yellow lens, which actually boosts the contrast in sort of dull conditions. You'll notice, like I say, that these goggles are in a dry bag of their own, and the reason for that is that it means that they don't get wet essentially. So when I come to put them on, they're nice and dry. I can get them straight onto my face, and they're not just steaming up from the off. If your goggles are all wet and then you put them on your face, the first thing to do is steam up, and you've got to try and sort that out, potentially in horrible weather, which is just faff that you don't need. So store your goggles nice and clean, ready to put on in their own dry bag. That works really well. I've actually got something else in this dry bag today as well, and that is my head torch. And this is a waterproof to a point head torch that's fully charged. that I know has got quite a decent burn time on it. In sort of springtime, I might have my head torch sort of further down in my pack if I think it's really unlikely that I'm going to use it, sort of more there for an emergency. This time of year, which is basically January for those watching, it's quite likely I'm going to use my torch at the start, at the end of the day, so I want it super accessible. Okay, so that's in the top of my pack, also in a dry bag. Okay, other things. So again, really accessible early on in the day are my crampons. I don't want to get into the mountains, find that conditions underfoot warrant wearing crampons, and then they're right buried in the bottom of my pack. Two reasons: one, I'm going to have to unpack to get to them, and two, I might just actually think, well, actually I can't be bothered to get my crampons out, it's too much faff, and then end up slipping and hurting myself or worse. So crampons are packed near to the top, and they're in their own bag, so you can get these super cheap online. You can get like a fabric one like this, or one with a bit more structure to it. And what that does, it just means that the spikes on my crampons aren't sticking into my pack itself, my lunch, my jacket or my helmet. It just keeps it nicely protected. So this is a pair of Slaver C2 Crampons, and they are fitted. They are already fitted to my boots. Okay. What I don't want to do is get on the hill and then start messing around with the sizing of my crampons, trying to fit them to my boots. I want to just get them out, clamp them on my boot, and be good to go. So definitely sort that out before you go on the hill. These are a C2 crampon, so they'll go with a B2 boot or a B3 boot. So if that doesn't make any sense to you, do some Googling or drop us a message, and we'll talk you through the different types of crampons and boots. But it's absolutely key that not only your crampons fit your boot, but they're the right crampons for the boot. Okay, otherwise they're just not going to work. So crampons, good to go, nice and near the top of the pack. Alright, so more stuff. I've got another dry bag. So you'll notice most stuff's in these dry bags, and this is for two reasons really. One, obviously, the clue is in the name. It's a dry bag. In rubbish weather, which quite often we get in the UK, let's be honest, it's going to keep your kit dry, which means when you get your gloves out, when you get your spare layers out, hopefully they're dry. But the other thing is it just keeps stuff organised. This has got gloves in, and I now know that if I go in my pack, get the red bag out, it's got gloves in. I don't have to start delving around for that pair of gloves that somehow found its way to the bottom of my pack. How many pairs of gloves you take sort of depends on the weather really, but even on a really nice day, say in Scotland, a really kind of bluebird day, we're probably going to go through a couple of pairs of gloves, because let's face it, snow melts when it gets warm. It gets on your hands get warm, your gloves get warm, and the snow melts and you end up with a wet glove at some point during the day. When we get wet gloves, we get cold hands. When we get cold hands, we can't operate. But things can actually get quite sort of dangerous when you really can't use your hands to put layers on or to navigate, for example. So, I'll carry at least 2 pairs of gloves, sometimes more. Quite a lot of instructors, including myself, will measure how crap a day has been weather-wise based on the number of pairs of gloves they go through. So a two pair of glove day is pretty nice, whereas a 4 or 5 is obviously fairly atrocious. So what I've got in here is a few pairs of decent mountaineering gloves. Now they can be quite expensive, but they're sort of worth the investment if you're going to spend a bit of time out in the winter mountains, and they'll keep the worst of the water out to a point. What I'll just be looking to do throughout the day is, as soon as these start to get wet, my hands start to get wet, swap them out, get a new pair on. So in here, just for the sake of illustration really, we've got couple of pairs of gloves, 2 pairs of gloves, and also a spare hat, because if my hat blows away that I'm wearing, I'm going to get a cold head, obviously. Having a hat on is one of the best ways of just retaining warmth. So that's just a lightweight, small hat that lives in there with my gloves in its own dry bag. Okay, so next thing that we've got in here is my drink. So I'm not really a flask person. I like to have something like an Nalgene bottle like this, just with some hot juice in. And this is in a sort of bespoke sort of Nalgene insulated case, if you like. And if I fill this up at sort of 8 AM with some hot juice, this will still be warm at 1 o'clock. That kind of works for me. And that's a litre of liquid. That, you know, everybody's different, but for me, a litre of juice, perfect. Okay, so delving a little bit deeper now, I've got yet another dry bag, and this has got spare layers in essentially. So let's have a look what we've got. So again, this is even packed strategically, you know, so I know that the first thing that I'm going to get out, the first thing that I'm going to need is something like this. So this is just, the intention of this is just a bit of insulation. So this is going to go underneath my hard shell, my waterproof jacket, over my fleece, or my sort of mid layer, to give me a little bit more insulation. But it's not the sort of thing I'm just going to sit around in. I'm still going to be moving around, I'm still going to be walking, but maybe I'm a little bit higher up, and it's getting a little bit colder. Okay, so the next thing in here is another insulation layer, but this is kind of designed for when we stop. So it might be that we're lucky enough to stop and have a little bit of lunch, or it might be that I've, you know, stopped for another reason, for a prolonged length of time. And this is a synthetic jacket. It's sized to go over my waterproof and all my other layers. So I've essentially sized up in this jacket so it fits over all my layers. It's synthetic, so if it gets wet it still retains a fair bit of its insulating properties. It doesn't matter if it's raining, I can just chuck it on over everything and get warm. So I put this on if we've stopped, or if something bad has happened and I need to hang around on the mountain for a while, or even if the weather just gets so horrendous that I just need to get all my layers on and just get my head down and get off the hill. Definitely recommend synthetic over down. Just that down, when it gets wet, loses its insulating properties a lot quicker. You're probably not going to get that warm when your down jacket is completely saturated. So a decent sort of synthetic belay jacket, they get called, works really well. Also in the bottom of this pack here, I've got, you know, and again strategically packed, unlikely to use these now, but I've got a pair of mitts. So these can just go on when all my other gloves are completely saturated, or when the weather's super bad and I'm just walking out. I'll get them on. They're not super dexterous or anything like that, but they're going to keep our hands warm. They sort of just live in the bottom there. I've also got a spare compass. Again, I plan never to use it, but if I do lose my compass, then, you know, navigation is going to be extremely difficult in poor visibility. So, you know, having a spare just buried in the bottom of my pack is a great idea. Okay, and I've got a spare head torch. This is a little pencil head torch. It's super light. You know, weighs practically nothing. Yeah, it's not the brightest thing in the world, but it will get me off the hill if my head torch just decides to die for whatever reason. Okay, moving on. Next thing in the pack is a shovel. So it's a good idea to have a shovel within your group, and this is basically going to be super useful if I need to dig into the snow. So for example, I need to dig an emergency shelter because somebody's got injured, or I just want to get out of the wind for a while, maybe to have some lunch or whatever. If you are going to take a shovel with you, I definitely recommend you go for a metal one as opposed to some of the plastic ones that you can get on the market. Plastic ones, they just break, and if you're trying to sort of dig into quite hard snow or nevy, you're going to really struggle. So a decent metal shovel is what you're looking for, and you know, this is actually pretty light. So that's obviously the main blade, and with that comes a handle, so we end up with a shovel of around this sort of length. So super light and definitely worth having one in your group. Okay, getting towards the bottom of the pack now. So this is stuff that I really hope not to be using at all, really. And what we've got here is something called a blizzard bag. So if you've not seen these, it's a great piece of kit. This is essentially like your foil blanket that you get at your end of your marathon or whatever, but it's got some insulation in it, and they do loads of different types. It's made by a company called Blizzard. This one's the jacket, and basically it's like a big badly fitted jacket. If somebody gets injured, your priority is going to be to keep them warm, so getting them in this is going to really help with that. It's obviously really light. This weighs 230 grams. It's vacuum packed, it's super small. Like I say, they do loads of different types. They do a sort of sleeping bag and all sorts of other stuff. Definitely worth the investment. Chuck it in the bottom of your pack in winter and you won't regret it. So yeah, blizzard bag goes in. And then to complement the blizzard bag, we have what's called a kisu or a bothy bag. And if you haven't seen one of these before, this is basically just like a tent without any poles. So if you imagine the fly sheet of a tent, what we'd do is we'd get inside this, and within the group we'd all sit on it to stop it blowing away. And it doesn't have any structure, but what it will do is keep the wind off us and create its own little microclimate. Basically, getting inside a bothy bag, if you're injured, or if you're having to sit out some poor weather, or you know, having to sit the night out for whatever reason, it could literally be the difference between surviving the night and not in a winter environment. So if you haven't got one of these, go and get one. You get all sorts of different sizes. This is actually a 4-man. It will fit 4 people in. You can get 2 people. You can get a 6-man, whatever. So just make sure that within your group you've got at least one of these, and it's big enough to fit your whole group in. So that's a 4-man there. It's not actually an Exped bag, this one. It's just in Exped dry bag. Good girl. So also in here we've got first aid kit. This isn't an off-the-shelf first aid kit. This is something that I've made myself. My approach to first aid really is that I only carry stuff that's going to sort of deal with a very serious injury, so like a major trauma injury, for example. I don't carry all the sort of like small bits and bobs that you get in the sort of off-the-shelf first aid kit, other than maybe some Compeed for blisters. So I won't get into the contents of this here, maybe in another video. But again, you know, at the bottom of the pack, out of the way, and in its own separate dry bag. So right at the bottom now, what we've got here is not a first aid kit, it's just a useful little bag. This is basically a little crampon repair kit. If my crampons break, then I've got no way of walking on sort of icy terrain, and if that terrain is steep, then you know the chance of me slipping is going to be quite high. So what I need to do is sort my crampons out and at least mend them to a point that I can get off the hill. So what I like to carry in this little bag here is some zip ties, because what can't be fixed by zip ties? Not much. So these are great just for sort of fixing straps and, you know, basically strapping a crampon onto my boot if I need to. So the other thing that I've got in here is this, and if you're a skier you're going to recognise this. It's basically a strap that's designed to hold your skis together when you're transporting them around, and they're super strong and they're absolutely brilliant for doing things like strapping a crampon to somebody's boot when the bails break. So I definitely kind of recommend sort of chucking one of those in, particularly if you skier and you've got them knocking about. Other stuff I've got in here, I've got a spare strap for a crampon. You know, this is a Gravel one, but it'll pretty much fit any crampon with a little bit of bodging. And what just fell out there was an Allen key specific to my crampons, just to sort of deal with any little sort of amends. I've also got a little bit of cord. Again, can be used to sort of tie crampons onto boots, but actually this is in here to fix laces. So if the laces snap on my boot, then this can sort that problem out. Finally, I've got a couple of spare batteries in there as well, and these are actually for my GPS unit, which we'll come to in a little bit. So that just lives in the bottom of the pack. Last thing in here is a map, and you know, it's just actually slid down to the bottom, but this is my spare map. I've got my actual map that I would use to navigate, would be in the pocket of my shell jacket or my outer jacket that I was wearing, but this is my spare map. So this is the sort of Harvey's 1 to 40,000 map of the Cairngorms. I quite like these. The scale's great, you know, it's not too small, not too big, and these maps are fairly robust and waterproof to a point as well, so that just lives in the pack as well. So that's pretty much it, apart from the top pocket. So in here I'd probably have some snacks, just super accessible. And the other thing I like to take is just a multi-tool. It's super useful just for sorting little jobs out, cutting stuff, great sort of useful little tool. Okay, so the last thing that I've got in here is my GPS that I mentioned earlier. So I have got mapping software on my phone, but we know what the cold weather can do to our phone battery. It just absolutely fries it really, and your phone's dead. So I quite like to carry a dedicated GPS unit, and this has obviously got fresh batteries in as well. This has mapping on it. It's waterproof to a point. If I was just going out in an absolute bluebird day, then maybe I wouldn't bother taking this with me. But if I think there's any chance of me walking around in a whiteout and having to navigate in anger, so to speak, then I just think, why not, let technology help you do that. I definitely wouldn't be relying on this 100%. I know if I need to, I can navigate using my map, I can navigate using my compass, but if I can speed things up and at least double check myself using the GPS, then I'll definitely do that. Okay, so the last few bits that aren't actually going to go in the pack, but these would actually go in my jacket pocket, that I'm wearing on the hill, are my actual map that I'm going to use to navigate as I travel around. And what I quite like to do is to either print off my own maps using waterproof paper, or just put them in a waterproof case like this. And what we've basically got here is just the area that I'm going to, all nice and easily accessible, in a format that I can fold up to about this size, slide into my pocket, not super bulky, easy to get out and just navigate super easily without any risk of it sort of like blowing away because I've got a huge OS map in my hands. So that's my map that would live in my jacket pocket. In the same pocket, I like to have my compass, so I have a pocket specifically for navigating, if you like, and that would be tied to my jacket as well, so the chance of me losing it is minimised. And this is a full-size compass as well, which is going to be super easy to use with gloves on rather than a little tiny one. Other stuff, I like to carry a little sort of timing card, which just sort of tells me how long it's going to take me to walk certain distances at certain speeds. It's all stuff you can do in your head, but if it's dark and the weather's bad and you're tired, it's just super easy just to look at that and refer to it. So it's just quite a nice little extra thing to carry. I quite like it. The last couple of bits is a buff. Can be used for all sorts of things, but I quite like that around my neck. And a pair of liner gloves. So these just go inside my main gloves, and just means that when I am swapping gloves around, I'm not getting wet hands and then struggling to put a wet hand into a dry glove, which can be really difficult. So we'll do another video at some point, maybe about how to carry an ice axe, and we'll definitely do one on the sort of kit that we would wear, so the actual sort of layers that we might wear on a winter walking day out. So I hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions, hit them in the comments below and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. Plus, if you've got anything that you take that isn't here, why not just put that in the comments below as well, and we'll all have a good chat about it. So see you out there.